Hey guys, this is Taylor. I'm doing a heads-up leak finder video for CardRunners Pro JCL. JCL is a 6-max player, first and foremost, and I don't think plays very much heads-up, but he had the chance to sit down and play against Phil Galfond, aka J-Man, aka Mr. Sweets 28, and just figured he'd take the chance to do it and send us the video, and we'll go over the hand histories. This is quite an interesting session, and actually I have to confess that I was planning on just kind of zipping right through it and going through the hands and just calling it out like I saw it. But after sort of 20 minutes or so of putting some audio to it, I realized, you know what, I need to sit down and think about this first of all, and also watch through the video so I can kind of get an idea of what's going on here. I just think that there's a lot of situations that aren't standard that will be fairly interesting to you guys. So without further ado, I'll get right into the action. Just to set the stage, I think I know Phil is playing much lower than he usually does, so it's always sort of important to kind of understand who you're playing, the environment you're playing them in, that type of stuff. So I would anticipate, no matter what, that, you know, obviously the money means next to nothing to Phil playing these stakes, and it's very possible he's testing out new ideas, new plays, trying to create educational spots, things like that. So we're going to see some of those situations, and I guess I'll just talk about those as they happen. So just a side note, looks like JCL's got Taylor Swift as his avatar, which I have to say I'm a pretty big fan of Taylor, and that's not just because of her name or that she's a hot 18-year-old, but I do like Taylor Swift. So let's just continue with the action. Oh, and I also wanted to say, please do, if you have questions or disagree with, my analysis or with JCL's plays or both, please do post on the comments, because this is one of those sessions where I think that there's probably maybe not going to be a consensus about the right play in some situations, and I'm frankly interested to see what you guys think. There's a lot of really, really good players that are watching some of these videos, so help us out here. So right away, Phil raises to 88, which is much less than the normal re-raise. Most people are re-raising to about 100 or maybe even 110 in some of these situations. Just something to think about. Not really enough to really make a judgment there at this point, I wouldn't say, but I definitely noticed that right away. So we've called Ace-9 in the big blind. Phil is going to be raising any ace, obviously, and I would probably estimate he's raising about 90 to 95% of his hands from the button. So a hand like Ace-9 is great to play because it's dominating a lot of the aces that he is playing, although it's never really that far ahead of another ace. I guess Ace-9 maybe can be, but as you get down to like an Ace-8 or an Ace-7, it's not really that far ahead of a hand like an Ace-5 or an Ace-6. But at any rate, we have a lot of aces there's a lot of aces that he's raising that we're dominating, obviously, and obviously a bunch of junk hands as well. We flopped a good hand here, and because it's the beginning of the match, I don't really mind raising right here. We're probably going to be having to, if Phil comes over the top here, I would probably just end out sticking it in, or at least calling and then getting it in if Phil bets after that, because this is a great flop to sort of play back at somebody, because it's unlikely Phil has anything. It's likely it's the beginning of the match. He's probably c-betting 100% of his hands right here. He might check back some ace highs right here just to slow the pot down, but Phil is an astute player and can definitely realize that JCL can be check raising with nothing. So in this situation, if Phil re-raises, I'm definitely not folding. Given that Phil calls, that scares me just a little bit. And the problem is here, you have to think about what hands is Phil calling with. Okay, Phil's going to certainly call with the king, call or raise with the king, probably call if he thinks that JCL doesn't have anything. He's going to call with any 9, obviously. He's going to call with any pair of 10s through aces. He's going to probably call some smaller pairs just because he's going to wait and see what JCL does on the turn. And then he's probably going to occasionally call with some floats or some, queen jack, queen 10 type hands. So given that he's calling with some hands that we beat, 9s with worse kickers, small pairs, stuff like that, he's calling with some hands that we lose to, basically a king is really the only realistic hand that we're losing to right here. I think the right play in this situation is to check, and there's no way that I'm check folding. I'd be check calling right here. I think we induce some bluffs from the hands that have not, the draws that have not got there, or the floats, and we also can get value from a hand like, I don't know, 9-10 or 9x he'd probably check back a 9-10, 9x type hand, and then we get value on the river. In this situation, we go ahead and bet, and that's fine if we think Phil's going to stack off ultra light. Do we think Phil's going to stack off with any 9 or even a lower pair if he had one? I'm not sure about that answer. That's probably up to you to decide. I don't know enough about. I know Phil's certainly capable of doing that. That's something you'd have to decide. But my line in this play would be to check the turn. Given that we've bet and Phil's raised, I think I'd probably begrudgingly get it in, just because I think. I don't know. It's such a tough situation right there to know that we have to really think that Phil's coming over the top or raising for value hands that are worse than ours, like maybe like a queen 9 or a 9-10. If anything, I'd probably just call. I probably don't think I would just ship it in right there, but that's, I guess, up for debate. At any rate, it's tough because it's one of the first hands of the match, and people are generally a little more frisky. If they think you're going to play a little straightforward, I found that players will themselves start to be a little more frisky at the beginning of matches these days. Sort of interesting to see what you guys think there, but I would certainly, if I did check raise that flop, I would certainly check call the turn. So we've flatted here with king queen. That's fine. I think I would actually, instead of check calling right there, I think I would actually check raise. The reason being, we just got stacked to Phil, and I think he's seen that we've raised lightly with that ace-9. I guess ace-9 isn't a terrible light raise right there on that flop, but he certainly knows we're capable of raising with hands that aren't like, premium hands. I would probably just get in the habit of trying to set the tone at the match at the beginning, and since I have 2 overcards and he likely doesn't have anything, I would probably just check raise that king queen right there. That's sort of like more of a game flow dependent play than anything else. Given the way that this hand played out, obviously there's not a whole lot we can do. But I would have either just check folded that there or check raised it. I think it's just going to be really hard to play king queen out of position against Phil too. Now later in the match, if he thinks that if he has an image, if we feel that he thinks we're tight, and that when we check call, it means we have a pretty good hand most of the time, and we feel like we can either pick up something and have him bluff off if we hit a king or a queen later, or if he checks back the turn, we can bluff him off ace high or something like that on the river. Okay, that's fine. But I don't think we really have that dynamic created yet, so I would just rather steal the pot if possible, or just give up and wait for another time. It's fine. You can pick. Sometimes you can steal it. Sometimes you can just give up and wait. I don't think I would check call just yet in the match. This is the situation on table number 2 here. If you'll notice, we raised pre. That's fine. We checked back the flop. I don't like the check back right there. Given that there's draws out there. I think it's sort of a situation where Phil is going to play fairly fit or fold, given that it's the beginning of the match, and we've gotten some chips in already. It's clear that we're not willing to just sort of sit around and not play back at him. I think that Phil will, if he has a hand like a good draw or a queen, a big queen, he's going to be check raising us, and we're going to be done with the hand. But more often than not, he's not going to have a whole lot, and he's probably just going to get rid of the hand. The other thing is that so we brick off on the turn like we're going to do 90% of the time, and then Phil's liable to bet into us with nothing, or check to us and know that we don't have anything. Because here's the situation, we've checked back this flop. How often do we really have anything that's decent? Checking back a very wet flop with a hand like, I don't know, king queen or queen jack or something like that just doesn't seem like a very good idea. So he's checking to us. We're going to bet to try to take it down. We can't really represent a whole lot right here. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of really good hands that we can possibly have. I don't mind doing it. I would prefer just to bet the flop and be done with it right there. Clearly, there's going to be times where you need to check back hands that have the potential to make a really good hand on the turn. But at the beginning, I would probably just rather just bet and be done with it. We 4-bet right here on table number 1. I don't mind playing ace-x suited to a re-raise in this day and age, heads up, because people are generally re-raising hands like ace queen, ace king, sometimes ace jack, and they're flatting their other aces. So if you're going to be, if there's less aces in their re-raising range, then there's more aces that you can call and feel less dominant, feel like you're less likely to be dominated by an ace. So in the old days, everybody would re-raise like ace 9, ace 10, ace jack, just because they'd get called by other aces. So it's fine to raise those hands, and because your opponent's going to be calling hands you dominate. But when opponents aren't calling hands that you dominate, people adjust their strategy, so they want to keep hands they dominated in the pot. So in this situation, if we have a hand like ace 4, and we know our opponent probably isn't going to be raising a hand like ace 10 or ace jack, I don't mind calling with an ace because, first of all, people love to bluff the ace-high flops anyway. So if we connect, it sort of induces bluffs from the other person a lot. And also, we have a hand that can make a straight. We can make sort of some funky, decent hands. I guess what I'm saying is I prefer not to turn it into a bluff as much as I think some people do it more than I do. That's just my style. So we've turned this hand into a bluff right away. People love to 4-bet a lot early at the beginning of matches as well, and sometimes you get away with it, sometimes you don't. I guess if you think you can get away with it, you should do it. A player like Phil may come over the top of you with nothing. I don't know what he has, but he has come over the top, and we have to fold, obviously. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you are playing a strategy, I think people have adopted overall to the kind of the 4-bet bluff strategy that people use heads up at high stakes. People generally play pretty well against 4-bets now, and they'll if the guy's doing it too lightly, they'll 5-bet very light. So they'll be 3-betting like a hand like pocket 4s or 5s to get 4-bet bluffed and then just ship it all in. And worst case, they're dominated sometimes, but they get so many folds that and they're up against like ace king, ace queen a lot too, so that they're even ahead of that hand. I guess what I'm saying is you don't want to go crazy with 4-bets against someone who's sort of used to it and adept at playing back. It's just something to consider. And you'll see here that Phil is 3-betting a lot. I don't even know what his percentage is. We don't have any stats on this game, but we're looking here at quite a bit of 3-bets, and he's still making them very small. They're less than 3x 3-bets. At this point in the match, I would start to think, okay, this guy's 3-betting me a lot. He's not 3-betting me large, so clearly he's trying to risk less to win the same amount. He's probably 3-betting a very wide range of hands, and he's going to see how I react to it. And Phil's hope is that he can see how we react, and he can adjust to how we react and do it better. You'll notice on the table number 2, he just did it to 123. Could have been for a random reason. It could have been, just to. It could have been because he had a big hand and he thought we would pay him off more lightly if he did it bigger. Who knows? I would guess that it was just random, and he just did that to give us something to think about. And that's something that's important. When you're giving your opponent something to think about, it's more difficult to play them. And you can notice that it's just much more difficult even for me to analyze some of this stuff because Phil's giving us so many different types of information that I'm trying to process and that JCL was trying to process, and it just makes it tough to play. So in this situation, JCL's raised the button. Phil's donked out for $10 into a $60 pot. In my book, that's never really a big hand here. The way Phil's been playing, I would anticipate if he had a big hand, he would check raise or even check call, just because of the fact that in ace high flop, most players are going to just auto lead that flop. Granted, this might be a situation where we may have checked back with eights, but I'd say 8 or 9 times out of 10, a good player is going to be betting an ace high flop. Because it's tough to re-raise and represent hands against, and people just generally give up on ace-high flops a lot. So in this situation, he's donked 10, and we've called check back the turn, check turn, and then check river. I don't think there's any value to be had by betting on that river, but what I would consider doing is raising him to like 40 or 50 on the flop, and just being done with the hand if he raises or calls right there. Just check back again. Because I think that our hand is overwhelmingly likely to be the favorite, and we can sort of have him. We cheaply get more information if we decide to kind of donk raise his donk bet. That's what I would have done in that situation, just to sort of make him give us some more information And if he wants to start turning king high into an expensive bluff for him, then so be it. But that's fine. We if we're getting him consistently to be like trying crazy and expensive bluffs out of position, we're gonna win in the long run. So I would much rather have them pay $40 to have him define his hand a little bit, start to get an idea of what he's doing, and rather than just sort of letting him dictate the tempo of the match. There's going to be some hands over this session that I probably won't get a chance to talk about. There's just sort of a lot of interesting spots. If you want to ask me afterwards about the hand, I'll be glad to talk about it. And generally, if I'm not saying much about it, I agree with what's going on, or potentially I've just missed something. But generally, I would agree with what's going on. So we've called King 3 suited. That's okay-ish. I can go either way with that one. That's pretty close. King 3 offsuit is obviously a fold. I prefer to call a hand like King 7 suited maybe, but it's probably not too bad of a play. So the flop has been checked back. We bet the turn, and let me make sure I got the action right. I think Phil bet 20. Yeah, Phil bet 20 on the flop, and we just called. I would probably just call there. I think that's fine. The turn, we donked 80. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that. I would probably just check right there. Let's keep the pot's already small. He knows, okay, so when he bets 20 into 60, in my mind, he's got like a second pair type hand, or a gutter, or something that he thinks like, okay, I want to try to cheaply win this pot, or get induce calls from worse, cheaply win the pot, probably give him something that's scary enough that he's not going to be able to that he's not going to come over the top of me too often with nothing, that type of thing. So when the turn comes a 9, like that's not a great card for our hand. Who knows what it is for his hand? We just don't really have a great read on his hand. He does probably not expect us to have a hand like Queen 10 or a diamond draw, because I have to feel like if we had a hand like Queen 10 or a diamond draw, we're probably going to be check raising that donk bet. So, we bet the turn. Okay, he calls us. Now the river comes a 7. Every single draw has got there. Every legitimate draw has got there, except for a diamond draw. Is our hand good at this point? I'm not really sure. So I would check this river and evaluate. Pot's 260 right now. Looks like on table number 1 we are sort of doing a float out of position, which is something that admittedly I don't use all that often. On an ace high board, I think it's a fine play. Especially, but looks like it's gonna work. Yeah, it's a strong play to use from time to time. Phil bets 150 into 260. I don't really know what to think here. I mean, he's betting. Is he getting value out of a worse hand? Not too many worse hands probably, but maybe some. I don't know. Maybe an ace jack type hand or something. But not really sure what to do. I think donking on the turn might have been our mistake there. I think the fold is probably fine on that hand. If you'll notice, though, overall we're getting 3-bet quite a bit. Bill has just been pretty relentless so far with 3-betting us. Here's a bigger one. I would actually, if I'm playing in Jay Steele's situation, I think that is actually a good spot to 4-bet. The reason being, one, we do, and I talked a little bit earlier about just flatting with like an ace instead of full. You're able to flat more ace X's because people aren't re-raising with ace X as much. I wouldn't be flatting a hand like ace 6 offsuit or even ace 8 offsuit or whatever, even ace 9 offsuit probably. But I would be flatting suited aces, especially like suited ace 2 or ace 3. And then also, I I would be four betting for bluffs sometimes with those aces, because there is the card removal effect that he's less likely to have ace king or ace queen himself. So I think that's a good spot to four bet there, because he's been three betting really, really small. 90% of his three bets have been to 88. Every so often he's been doing it to like I think that was 123. There's more to win there, frankly. I mean, if someone's three betting you to 123, there's more for you to win than there is against the guy who's three betting you to 88. So just right there, that three bet's going to show us more of a profit, given that he's three betting the same range of hands, which I don't know if he is or not, but we don't have enough information to say one way or the other. You're going to show more of a profit for betting a guy that's three betting you larger than the guy that's three betting you smaller. So there's more to win right there. And there's also the fact that if Phil has like aces right there, I kind of don't think he's just going to all of a sudden pump it up to 123 after most of his three bets are 88. I think most of his three bets he try to remain consistent with his big hands, as most people tend to do. So I think that would be a good spot for a light four bet right there. This is an absolute call for me right here, with 6-8 suited. It's a pretty solid hand. It's the hand that can get a lot of hand. It will flop hands that we feel comfortable getting it in, like a pair and a draw, basically combo draw type hands. And it's unlikely to be dominated by, he's not going to be raising with like ace-6 or ace-8 very often. If he doesn't have a big pair, he's unlikely to be dominated. So there's a situation where, at some point we have to start playing back at him, because clearly he's three betting a ton. We're not calling a whole lot. I would start to adopt the strategy of calling quite a bit more, and then just donk raising flops. So when he leads out into us, like I'd call with king 6 right here, and if I hit the flop, I'd probably most of the time slow down. I'd probably just check. I'd probably just call most of the time if I hit it. Maybe 20% of the time I hit it, I would raise just to stay deceptive. And then when I missed it, maybe like 25 to 30% of the time when I missed it, I would just make a donk raise too, and it's going to make his life miserable. He's going to adjust to us, but before he adjusts, we can start to pick up some pots. And I think the problem is getting into this four bet bluffing situation where we're basically it's a guessing game, and he probably expects us to start four bet bluffing because he's been three betting so much. So I'd prefer to just take a flop, play in position, make sure I'm selective about the hands I do take a flop with. Like, I'm not going to be calling him with 10-3 or something like that. I don't know, something garbagey. But I'm going to be calling him with decent hands that are probably ahead of his raising range, and I'm in position. And I know he's doing it light. So, it's one of those situations where you just sort of have to understand you're going to get yourself into a high variance game. I prefer to get myself into a high variance game where I'm seeing flops, I'm in position, as opposed to a high variance game where I'm four betting and getting it in really light and stuff like that. Like that's not the high variance game that I prefer to play. And also, that's a game that is going to cause you a bunch of heartache because you're going to have crazy swings, and most of the time it's not even going to be your fault. The cards are going to play themselves, and you're going to get yourself into a situation where you're flipping coins for a lot of money. So, just my 2 cents on that. And until this is assuming people, and I know I'm missing a lot of hands here, but I'm just not going to be able to go over every hand if I want to talk about everything that I want to talk about in this video. This is assuming your opponent plays well against four betting and it has a general understanding of a natural four betting style, and the reaction, how he should be playing against those four bets. I assume Phil has that. If he didn't, then I think four betting lightly and often is a very practical and successful strategy. So we four bet with ace 10 obviously to get it in, because this game has just been getting pretty reckless, and he expects Phil to be folding so much. And also bluffing all in enough to make this profitable. And in an ironic outcome, they both got the same hand. Let's hope we can. Nope, no heart. So we flop second pair, and we, decent flop, decent turn for us. I'm check calling this turn pretty much all day long. I think we've got, I don't think we want to turn it into a bluff right here, even though we do have quite a lot of outs. But I think Phil's bluffing often enough here that just sort of check calling and hoping to improve our hand, or hoping that our hand is already good is good enough. On table number 1, I'm betting this all day. I'm not sure what he does here. I think that's fine. The call down right there. It turns out Phil had the worst possible hand for us. but that's fine. I think that's pretty standard. I'm betting that flop all day long. Again, what are we really repping here by checking back and then betting? Like maybe we can rep like, I don't know, like say we check back like king 10 without a heart or something. Yeah, we can rep that and Phil might go away. But then again, Phil might just throw in a huge raise knowing we never have anything really big because we would have bet it on the flop. The question is, are we ever checking back a flush? Probably not. Are we ever checking back, a big heart? I don't know that answer, but Phil probably doesn't think so. So table number 2, and this is actually worth talking about. The question. So I don't know what Phil had. I think he probably had something, but maybe he didn't. He's smart enough to know that he can just dump in a raise, and we literally have like no hands that can call. So you have to understand. You have to show up sometimes with hands that can't, in situations that people just can't fathom that you would have. Now in this situation, on table number 2, we have queen 6. I'm dumping a raise in there most of the time, given the way the dynamic of this has been going. I expect Phil to come over the top with nothing a fair amount of time. I expect him to be, donking some, hands that we have quite a lot of equity. Maybe like a 4 or 5 type hand, a flush draw and over. We're still not in great shape against, but we're happy to get a lot of money in against that type of hand. A pair and a flush draw, obviously we're still ahead, but it's not really that by all that much. At any rate, we have to sometimes be like pumping in money when we have really, really big hands, and sometimes we need to be slow playing too. I think raising was the right play there. So if this is me right here, I'm definitely going to start calling a lot of 3-bets. I'm also going to slow down a little bit on my button opening range. Instead of opening like the usual 90 to 95% of hands, I might be opening like 85% of hands. Because if Phil's going to be 3-betting us a ton, then we might as well start to think about strategies that will work well against his strategy. He's not playing a standard strategy, and that's actually one other thing I wanted to talk about. It gives people hell to play a strategy that they're just not used to seeing. These guys that play, 5-10, 2-4, 3-6 heads up for a living, they're used to seeing the same fish that they play all the time, the same fish that make the same mistakes. When they play regulars, they're seeing the same guys that watch training site videos, that study the stats of the game, that know the optimal way to play. But then when they have somebody sit down that plays like completely different than they're used to seeing, what the hell do? They get frustrated. Human nature takes over, and they're upset that they don't understand the right way to do it, or that they're upset that this guy's not playing how they expect him to be playing. You'd be wise to incorporate that into your game, and I think Phil's doing a really nice job so far of doing that. Obviously, I can't see his cards here, but I know just from trying to analyze the session that it's difficult to play against this type of thing. So on table number 1, we checked back a flush draw. Okay, I don't mind that as much because if we hit on the turn and he has a king or an ace, he's going to be probably auto-betting that hand, and we can raise and put him in a situation where he doesn't know what he's going to do. I like it. I think that's fine. I bet most of the time, but I think checking back there is pretty good too. I don't really like 3-betting with the king 8. I would probably just call with that hand and make sure I check raise enough flops that I missed to try to make up for the fact that I'm going to be out of position against a guy that plays well. If I did that though, I would bet this flop as such, and real quick check there on that turn. JCL's definitely got to watch his timing. I think if I was Phil, I'd be just auto firing away at I don't know, $240 here or something like that, just to take this pot down, because I think he's almost never got the goods. Just the check just seemed real quick, almost just well, this hand's over. Just sort of like a mental I'm done with this type of thing. One thing that you'll notice, I have to think I've been one of the biggest proponents of watching an opponent's timing and getting timing tells from people I'm playing against over the years of online poker. And there's some people that frankly don't even, they say, oh, I don't even look for timing tells. I don't care if I give them off. I do things really quickly all the time, no matter what. Well, that's fine. By the way, table number 1, I would definitely raise here on the flop if it was bet to me. I'd raise. I just sort of min raise plus like a couple blinds. It looks like it's checked us. I would bet. I'd bet like, I don't know, 90 or something. So this is fine. But timing tells. If you look at a guy, watch Cole South play high stakes. He takes time, hits time bank on nearly every like somewhat interesting decision. I'm talking like a couple times on average per hand or something like that. And it's because he is smart enough to know that he's going to need to think. Now, this is a tough spot here. I'm going to talk about this in a second after I finish this Cole thought. He's smart enough to know that there are situations that exist that he's going to have to think about things, and he's never. I promise you this. He's never going to give away any timing unless it's something that he's trying to do. So if the other guy who says, okay, well, timing's not that important, I'm just going to act pretty quickly all the time. If even like in one hand out of every 5,000 hands, he gives away a little bit more information than Cole's giving him, that's an edge right there. Now, granted, that's not a really big edge over the grand scheme of things, but if you're talking about playing high stakes and you want to get to the high stakes, like I would suggest eliminating any possible leaks that you have. And if, keeping the time consistent between all of your decisions is something that you can do to give yourself a small edge over the guy that doesn't, then, my guess is that you should do it. So in this situation, we bet the flop. I would have bet the turn, actually. I don't believe we bet the turn, but I just want to make sure we didn't. Okay, we checked back on the turn. I would have bet the turn because I think that his hand is made up a lot of hands like pocket 9s, pocket 8s, pocket 6s, ace 4, ace 3, stuff that like has hit the flop but doesn't really feel good about bet folding and doesn't want to get blown off the hand. I also think his hand is potentially, well, I was going to say I think it's possible he was going to check raise like a draw type hand, but I think he would have actually check raised as opposed to check calling a draw. Unless his plan was to check call, check raise, and hope we're bluffing enough to to show a profit on that play, which actually isn't a bad play now that I think about it. But in this situation, the pot's 375. I think our mistake is not betting this turn. I think our hand is just good a lot. It looks like we're going to be airballing a ton. That's the key here. Phil has bet almost every single flop. So he checks to us. This is in re-raise pots. He checks to us. He's going to anticipate that we're going to be betting a ton of flops here because he probably thinks, well, JCL thinks I don't have much, so I'm going to check call a wider range of hands, and I'm going to expect him to bluff a fair amount of hands. So we have to value bet more thinly. I would just pretty much automatically bet the turn and get it in because I think Phil has a worse hand most of the time at that point. Now we check back, and he just overbets 580 into, I forget what the pot was, 470 or whatever. I would probably call in this situation. I also have the luxury of knowing what happens, but I would call. It looks like we don't have anything here. That's the other thing is that there's a large percentage of the time we don't have anything at all, and Phil just wins this pot instantly. I would absolutely raise this river also too, on table number 2. The way that hand went down, it looks like Phil's just sort of donking to. Let me make sure about that. Yeah, there's some straights that are possible, but the way the pot's small, and there's just some things that there's just not a whole lot of straights that he's going to have right there. If he comes over the top of us again, then I'd fold the hand, but I just think that raising right there is the right play. Hey guys, sorry, my phone was ringing and I didn't want to have that distract me any more than it was. So here we are with sort of on table number 2. I thought we should raise, and on table number 1, I thought we should call, even though I think we misplayed the hand on the turn. And we do call, and we lose. That's one of those situations where I don't know what the right answer is. I have not played enough with Phil. I would call given the fact that I think he's going to be bluffing us quite a bit there. It just seemed like a right time for it. I don't know what he would have done had he missed. Well, had he not improved his hand, he probably would have check called, or check evaluated at least. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm actually really not sure what I think about that call. And the more that I think about it, I'm wondering if Phil actually does what hands he's turning into bluffs right there. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think about this myself here, because if he does have the likely hand, like pocket sixes, sevens, eights, like one of those mediocre hands, is he turning that into a bluff? And what hands is he turning into a bluff? Maybe if he check call a draw, hoping to check raise the turn, but we check back the turn, so all he has is a draw. And now he's trying to just kind of bluff the river. That's possible. It's kind of unclear to me actually whether or not that's a call or not, but what is clear to me is I would bet the turn. Sometimes also it's hard for me to, as I'm thinking about these actions, it's hard for me to analyze play when like some of these plays that Phil's making or JCL's making are not standard plays that I would make. So I have a hard time sort of like kind of like figuring out what I would do in that situation, just because I haven't been in very many of those situations. Just further underscores the importance of doing things that your opponents aren't used to seeing, and Phil's just really doing a nice job here. I'm calling with King 7 suited right here. I'm not going to turn it into a bluff. I'm just going to call. It's quite possibly ahead of a lot of hands he's 3-betting right here. Far ahead, actually, because I'm sure he's 3-betting some small suited connectors and things like that. It's actually greatly within the realm of possibility that we're ahead of, that we're dominating his hand. He's probably not doing it with ace-7. And so it's possible he's got like 8-7, 9-7, 10-7, things like that. Obviously he's going to be 3-betting king-queen and stuff too, but he's really, really pumping up the aggression. And the other thing to keep in mind is that he knows that we're going to react in a certain way. He knows that most people, competent, high-stakes regulars, I wouldn't say the guys that are at the top of the top, but guys that are sort of like decent players and, have started to make a name for themselves or whatever, are going to start to react by just 4-betting and 4-betting and 4-betting, because that's what they've seen. That's the way they think that they should react to a guy that's 3-betting too much. Well, that's good, but if the guy who's 3-betting too much knows that you're going to start 4-betting a lot, then I'm not so sure that's good. So just something to keep in mind, and I think the better strategy is to just open a few less hands on the button and call more of his 3-bets and make life hard on him. I think this is fine. I think raising that is fine. Good card on the turn. Might kill some of our action a little bit. I would probably, let's see here, make sure I got the pot size right. I don't play on Poker Stars, so I always have a harder time figuring out the pot size and just sort of like kind of following the action, if you can believe that. So the pot's 320, and we've got 840 effective stacks right here. I think I would bet, let's see, what would I bet? We've got 20, I think I would bet about 180 here. 640, 660. Yeah, I bet about 180 here. Leaving me with 660 left and putting another 360 in the pot. So, that basically gives me a pot size bet on the river. And also it would encourage, this is such a good situation for us too, because generally speaking, we've got a flush draw that dominates a flush draw of his if he has one. And we also have the straight right now, so if he just has like a one pair type hand, he's drawing completely dead. I prefer to bet a little smaller in situations like this. Also, it gives us the flexibility to bet smaller when we are bluffing. So, there's times where I'll bet like 130 into a 330 pot or something like that. And if the guy has like a second pair and he knows he's facing a potential big bet for me on the river and he just doesn't know where he stands, he mucks it. And you're basically your bluffing is your cost of bluffing is cheaper, and there's a great cost of future bets that this guy's facing here, either way, and you're just gonna probably save money on the times when you get called in bluffs is basically what I'm saying. So I actually didn't even get a chance to see what was happening on table number 2 while I was talking about this. As I said before this video, the action is pretty intense, and it's one of those situations where there's going to be a lot of sort of marginal spots, and it's hard to analyze them all at once. So we bet 50 into the 60 pot with the nuts. Pretty bad card for us. I mean, it's fine for our, not really bad for our hand, I guess, but I actually like the way that he's played this hand. The quick check back is good. I think you're going to induce from a lot of different hands that are just trying to pick up the pot. I don't think you're going to get paid off here with a hand that's worse very often at all. I mean, I just don't think he's going to expect us to turn like something really random into a bluff here. I think what I would do is probably raise it to like, I don't know, 320 or something like that, and hope that he just pays us off with the dummy end of the straight. But you know, I think really the value in that bet is just getting paid off, getting an extra bet in there from like the garbage hands that would have folded the turn. You know, one thing to consider too is also just overbetting the turn and hoping that he thinks that we're just trying to push him off something, or starts questioning himself, thinking that, you know, we're, you know, throwing in an overbet here or there just is not a bad idea. So we bet the flop here. I think this is actually a good spot to overbet on the turn, given that we do have some outs, and the board is just like pretty scary and draw heavy. There's straights that so 4-6 got there on the turn. There's random 2-pair hands. There's random combo draw hands. The reality of the situation is when he calls pre-flop and check calls the flop, it's overwhelmingly likely that he has like a, you know, a 1-pair type hand. He maybe picked up a combo draw. He could potentially have a combo draw on the turn, but he just probably doesn't have like a nut type hand. And there's so many hands that, you know, it's one of those situations where I think people will just give up fairly easily. So if you could just toss like, I don't know, 260 into the pot on the turn, 230 in the pot on the turn, and get people to fold out. Also, then he knows he's facing a very big decision on the river, and you're inflating the pot like that. So I just think tossing in a big bet on the turn there is something that will likely win you the pot when your opponent knows he's facing a potential large bet on the river as well. And it's probably unclear in his mind where he stands. Let's see what he had. I actually did not remember what he had. I don't remember even seeing that hand the first time I watched this footage. So I'm actually glad that my read was right there. That's sort of encouraging. That, I mean, it's we won the pot anyway, obviously, but we got fairly lucky. I believe we hit that 6 on the river. So we 3-bet 7-5 suited. Okay, that's fine. He's 4-betting light. You know, in this situation, at some point when a guy's 4-betting light, so, you know, now we 5-bet light. You know, we just pumped in 50 big blinds here out of position with 7-5 suited against a world-class player. You know, I've been in better situations before in my life in poker, so you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I really do think that Phil expects us to 5-bet light because he knows that we know he's 4-betting light because he's deep and it's a great situation to do it. You know, am I going to say, like, I don't know. If I did 4-bet that light, I'm sorry, 5-bet that light, you know, do we think that, okay, so what do we, this flop is actually good for our 5-betting range. You know, it's probable that if we 5-bet a hand for value, this absolutely smacked us in the face because we either have aces, kings, ace, king. Queens is the only hand that it's pretty bad here. If we have jacks, obviously it smacked us in the face. I don't think we're 5-betting tens or anything worse than that. So if we did it for value, this absolutely just smacked us in the face. The problem is Phil's smart enough to know that many times we're doing it not for value. We're just bluffing and hoping that we're just going to take down his 4-bet. So in this case, it behooves him to bet 300 into 1,000 pot, hoping that he can just win it. Because even though he has error, let's say he has error 70% of the time here, you know, he just has to make a 30% pot bet and he can take the whole thing down. He's in a great situation because if we have error even some percentage of the time, he's just going to show an immediate profit right there because his equity is just so small against our good hands. Basically what I'm saying here is I think I would bet like, like 310 right here and be done with the hand. Basically, what I'm saying is I think we should have made the bet that Phil made, because it's going to be expensive for him to come over the top. Is he going to want to come over the top of us with nothing? Yeah, he might, but he's going to have to put in another 60 big blinds to bluff us. If we bet 310, he's going to have to put in 620. He's got to put in another 62 big blinds to bluff right there, and he's got to be pretty damn sure about his read. He might be, but at the same time, he might also just give up because the flop seemingly smacked our big hands right in the face. Just my 2 cents there. Again, the biggest comment I have right there is, not that what that play was bad necessarily, the 5-bet bluff, but that the fact that we're playing against a world-class player that is smart enough to know we're going to be doing that, and when you're playing against that player that's smart enough to know you're going to be 5-bet bluffing out of position, 200 big blinds deep, and is capable of calling you lightly and making your life miserable, then you're probably at the wrong table. And obviously JCL knows that. He's just playing here to learn a little bit. But when you find yourself in that situation, that just sort of underscores how important it is to get the hell out of that situation and probably find a better spot. There's a lot of talk about, who are the best players. Are the guys that are playing nosebleeds, the Durs, the Phil Galfonds, the Dang brothers, people like that. How much better are they really than the guys that play like 10-20, limit heads up for a living? From a technical perspective, I would say probably not that much better. But from a perspective of, being creative, knowing how to play different types of players, having no regard for the value of money, which is important in a game like this, I would say that they're a lot better. And they've played against guys that rich fish that make really, really spazzy plays and make just sort of non-standard situations come up, and that's valuable. It's tough to play against that type of stuff if you're used to playing against like your average 10-20 like reg fish. So I guess what I'm saying is, a guy like Phil, I wouldn't underestimate him if I was playing like 10-20 or a regular. And I'm not saying JCL is or has. I guess I'm just making a comment because I hear a lot of times people always ask, well, they don't play that many hands, and they play a lot of mediocre players. Well, yeah, but they also have a really, really intense, strong understanding of the psychology of the game. And when you're playing against when two really good players are playing deep, heads up, no limit, the psychology of the game is much, much more important than your fundamentals. So this flop, we've checked back. All right, fine, we checked back. I'm not like crazy about it. It's not terrible either. It's fine. Now we're raising. Again, we're not really repping anything. I mean, what I would suggest to JCL is to start checking back with some hands that he can confidently raise for value. So if he has like a baby flush here, or if he has a, I'm not even sure what else he would do. Maybe even a straight. I might even put my money in with the straight right there, which is crazy. But the way this match is going, you might have to do that. So I think we're sort of incinerating money. Just like, if anything, I might just call that turn bet and then see what happens on the river, given that we have a fair amount of equity in the hand. And then every once in a while bluff it if I missed, and I don't know. It's just sort of a tough spot, obviously, and we've checked back the flop with a hand that, I think most of the time I would bet with. So Phil's continuing to make our life pretty difficult here. That's, I guess, to be expected. Okay, pretty standard check call pre-flop, check back on the flop. Phil just gets out of the way smartly. So you'll see that although Phil's playing hyper aggressively, he's not trying to win every single pot, and that's really important. He had an ace king flop, and he just said, you know what, I'm done. Who knows what he had, but he just didn't want to even take a stab at it, and he saved some bets. So in this situation, I think raising is fine with ace queen. I think I'd probably check call maybe 20 to 25% of the time right there, just so that, like, that's such a dry flop, and I want to make sure that when I am calling on a dry flop, I actually have some hands that I can, like, I basically have to have a hand sometimes that I'm calling there. It's not just like an ace nine type hand that just thinks it has the best hand, or a second pair type hand, because I expect him to like barrel quite a bit because there's just not a whole lot of hands that I'm really going to have. But at the same time, I also need to be able to check raise my good hands there, so that when I actually am check raise bluffing, I have some credibility. So I did not even see what happened in this situation on table number 2. All I know is that we have a ton of money in with 6-5 offsuit, out of position. So the pot's 220. He bets 120. Okay. I think my standard would be to bet that, but I'm going to check call sometimes too. I prefer... It all really depends on the opponent too. How often is that person betting if you check to them? Are they playing optimally if you check? Or are they just making your life miserable by bluffing, just enough to make you not sure and all that stuff? Plus, even against a random hand, there's tons of cards that can hurt us, much less a hand that is more indicative of the hands he's calling with when we 3-bet him. So, in this situation, I'm probably... It actually doesn't seem like a terrible spot to check raise him on the river here. I feel like because he checks back the turn, and then we check the river again. Like, I feel like he never has a really big hand here. I think this is actually sort of an interesting spot to just ship all in on him and hope that we can represent like top 2. We can represent a flush that's just bet the flop and then slow play the turn and then slow play the river. I think that's actually an interesting spot to do that. I wish I knew what Phil had, but I don't. I think that's sort of a spot that people, he's maybe trying to get some thin value. He's maybe floated and just trying to bluff. Like, there's times when he's just going to outthink himself and fold the hand that he shouldn't. There's times when he's not going to have anything at all. Just something to think about. I do like how JCL has sort of adopted his strategy a little bit to min raise against a guy that's 3-betting a ton. Even just to slow down the action, min raising is fine. I hate saying this because it's just annoying to play against people that do that, but basically, if you need to slow down the action a little bit, someone's getting frisky, the game flow is kind of going against you, maybe you're starting to tilt a little bit, but you don't want to quit, maybe min raise 10 buttons in a row and just start to slow down the action. So we 3-bet, and then we bet the flop. I think I would bet smaller in that situation. I believe our bet was like 110. I think that's a good situation to... pot's 199. Bet 130. I think I would bet like anywhere between 75 and 110. And then if he raises, we have some room to maneuver if we want to, or we can, and we're also risking less to win what is probably the same, given that he's probably not going to change his strategy too much if we bet smaller than 130. Plus, it almost seems stronger too. When someone bets like 130 into that spot, I don't know. It just seems to me like we're just sort of like trying to win the pot and hopefully get him to go away, which we are. That's an easy fold. I wonder, maybe somebody knows this, but is Phil's avatar just like a nothing, or is that just avatars turned off, or what is that? Because if I was playing on Stars, I think playing an avatar that just was not memorable at all, and people just couldn't associate that avatar with the actions that I was making, would be the optimal way to play, because you get less of like, if I see Taylor Swift's mug looking at me every time JCL makes a decision, I start to associate like Taylor Swift's picture with the actions that person's making, and it's easier to remember those things. But when you see like a blank little like gray screen or something, you start to just think like it's harder to like remember it, for me at least, to associate like those actions with that person, with that player. I'm just kind of curious if Phil has that avatar, or if JCL just turned him off, and that's what happens. I'm not really sure. I think Phil's or JCL's raise there is fine with Queen 10. Min raise with Jack 8 suited, yeah, that's fine. I'd definitely bet this this flop most of the time with Jack 8. It seems like we haven't really three bet him for value all that much. We've been three betting like some garbagey hands. We three bet some of our big hands, obviously, but like a hand like Ace Queen or King Queen, those are hands that I'm happily three betting for value against the way that Phil's been playing, because he's been calling us pretty lightly, and he's been just mixing it up in general. So a hand like that is much stronger than it would be against a normal player, because we can confidently, get money in, even if we don't have top pair, top kicker, or even like, I'm talking confidently for even less than 100 big blinds potentially. I mean, for even more than 100 big blinds potentially. So, just something to think about here. We're three betting and four betting some pretty garbagey hands here. We should, obviously, we're not making a whole lot of big hands ourselves, so it kind of hurts. But it'd be nice to be doing that with a little bit more of a balanced range. The three betting pre-flop. I think that's fine, just three betting the turn right there. Every once in a while you might check back and just check raise it all in. But I think that's fine. I think this is a good spot to check back and check raise the turn. And raise the turn. I think Phil would probably auto lead that turn most of the times. There's like no bad cards for us right there. This is fine too, obviously, because Phil's check raise there. I would absolutely flat this right here though. Given the way this has gone, I don't expect Phil. So say we min raise. The hope is that he stacks up lighter than he normally would, or that he bluffs us with something stupid. Now we're starting to get to the point where there's just not that much wiggle room left for him to bluff. Like he can bluff a little bit, but he has to risk another 120 big blinds or something like that to put in another bluff. And I guess what I'm saying is I think since there's no bad cards for us, like literally no bad cards for us on the turn, we might as well just call and then hope to get another bet out of him and then ship it in, or just call him down. I think that I would slow play that hand more often than not. That's a good check back there on that flop. I like this because now we actually have something. Betting pretty fast there. It seemed to me like he was planning a bet before that card before the action even got to him, which obviously he was. Just another advice. Just might take a little more time here if I was JCL on some of these actions. If you're playing 6-max, it probably doesn't matter as much because most of your opponents are playing a lot of tables and probably not being as observant. But when you're playing heads up, people are generally observing your every action, and if they are someone that pays attention to timing. Okay, so that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any comments or suggestions or disagreements or agreements, please let me know. If you like this type of stuff, we'll do more of it in the future. All right, thanks a lot, guys.